This question comes from Skyrimfest 26 in brackets AI upscaled. Do you think there's any chance the next generation consoles could come with oodles of RAM? It seems a lot easier to me to buy a few more gigs than to push APUs by a few more gigahertz. If they did, would it be worth it? Alex,
Wow.
I don't know what you think. My view on this is that there will be more memory in the next generation consoles, but oodles of RAM, that's like a baseline hardware cost that could be like, amount to billions of dollars across an entire console generation. Don't see it happening.
Yeah, specifically on like the Sony side, I don't know what Microsoft's exactly doing. If they're going to have like a super premium model that is like 1,200 USD or something like that. So I wouldn't throw it all off the table there. But I think Sony, who's going to have a more traditional console where they have direct control over the OS, direct control over the apps that are possibly run while the game is there. I think they're going to have a minimum of 24 and maybe a maximum of 24 around, just because what they're doing already within that 16 is great. And they're going to need more for the potential on hardware machine learning that they're going to do. And they're going to need potentially more for the vastly increased amount of ray tracing they're going to be doing. Mark Cerny's already talked about that. That's going to require more RAM. But the rest of it, I think modern textures are incredible. There's only so many art assets we can throw in a game before the amount of people who need to make them just you don't have that amount of working hours anymore, right? So we're already coming to limits there. And I also think the cost of things like DRAM is just ridiculous. So I don't think that's been something that's been going down in the last 6 years to incredible amounts. So I think there's just going to be like limits on how much they can potentially put in a next gen console as a result of that. And I think 24 would be amazing. I don't know how Oliver sees this. I don't know. What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, I think it's going to be either 24 or 32. I think either one of those possibilities. I think 24 would be fine. I'm not particularly concerned about RAM allotments in this generation of consoles at the moment. It feels like it's aged pretty well. Also, the handhelds, I would expect that most of the handheld devices that would be on the market for mainstream price points would probably only have 16. So if games are being developed for that machine as well as the consoles, certainly 24 looks more reasonable in that light. Also, definitely bumping APU clocks does seem a lot cheaper to me if they were to prioritize something like this user is saying.
Well, yeah.
Because, maybe you have a vapor chamber or a liquid metal thermal interface material, and you basically get that more or less for free. Get a few hundred extra megahertz potentially there. I think that definitely the additional RAM allotment will be more interesting for machine learning purposes, but even the utility of that is limited in a lot of respects because a lot of machine learning models that we used for graphics purposes are relatively small, or well under a gigabyte. It's easy to distill a good language model to a gigabyte or less nowadays. And that would produce a good enough result for most gaming purposes. And language synthesis AIs are only a few hundred megabytes. There's been an enormous amount of progress over the past 2 or 3 years in terms of getting these really high performance AI models down to a very, very small memory and storage footprint. So I would not necessarily anticipate that you would need a huge increase in RAM, and certainly something on the order of 48 or 64 gigabytes would be massively overkill. And that would increase the cost of the console by, I think, $2 or $3 additional US dollars per gigabyte of GDDR7, something like that, which is a pretty huge cost, I think, especially when you're shifting, millions, tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of units over the span of 6 or 7, 8 years. That's a huge outlay.
Yeah, absolutely. Microsoft, I've got no idea really what they're planning. I do think it is probably going to be a more expensive machine, no subsidies for the Xbox ecosystem. And I do think it's probably going to be competing more with PC pre-builts, whereupon you're suddenly in a completely different price bracket, and you can do things like a much more powerful, much larger APU, and you can have your 32 gigs of RAM. If it is following the trajectory of the PC market more than the console market, and there isn't so much of this kind of streamlined addressing of hardware, then I think they probably are going to need more memory. I think that's probably the way things are going. I mean, I did hear a story back in the day that there were studies done at Microsoft where, it's like, well, what if we didn't do a lean console? What if we did just make a PC in a box? And it turned out that the costs involved escalated dramatically. That kind of has a big impact if you're looking to take on a PlayStation 6, but it doesn't if you're looking to take on a PC with a discrete NVIDIA GPU in it. Because, if you look at the cost of pre-builts now, even if you're looking at an RTX 5060 based pre-built, you're looking at over $1,000. So that is a lot of, there's a huge gap there. And if you're just shipping out an APU board, that can be considerably more expensive than it would be if it were a console. You just have to wait and see on that one. Just theory crafting, as we like to call it. But certainly going to be interested to see what happens next. But I do think we're going to be seeing very, very different approaches.